All right, we are back here on the Just and the Suffering podcast talking Big East hoops. Joining me today to do that is a guy who covers the Big East for Fox Sports, also does some work at SNY. The great Vin Parise is on the podcast. Vin, welcome. How are you?
Mike, thanks so much for having me on. Looking forward to a great time of the year when March Madness is right around the corner.
Yeah, it's a great time of the year. A little bit of an inside podcasting story. People may not know this, but you were actually the reason this podcast exists.
I know. You know what? It was an honor to have you in the classroom, but even more proud to see that you've built this into a podcast that's going to go from, that one first podcast that you did for the class into double digits. Now you're on to your triple digits of podcasts. So congratulations to you, and pretty cool to see.
And with that in mind, we'll go on to the Big East, which is why Vin is here today. So I want to start first on general. It's been a very parity-filled season of college basketball. What do you think about all the parity this year?
It's been an interesting year. The critics, Mike, the first 2 months of the season, they tended to talk a lot more about, well, college basketball's down this year. It's a down year. It's a down year. And, that was an interesting take because, listen, parity is a word that gets thrown around a lot in the world of college basketball, whether you're talking regular season conference play or whether you're talking the NCAA tournament. But this year, I really felt that parity rang true. Now, if you want to say down in terms of, okay, we didn't have a Zion Williamson or a Barrett or a John Morant this year, or an Anthony Davis Kentucky team that just was unbeatable. Okay, I'll buy that. Yeah, this is not going to be the strongest lottery for the NBA draft that we've seen in recent time. But if you love college basketball, if you're a college hoops junkie, if you love rankings, and the top 25 and top 10 literally flipped over every other week this year. And I truly believe whether you want to talk about the Big East tournament coming up at Madison Square Garden, which I'll be covering this week, or if you want to just talk about March Madness in general when the 68 teams are drawn, it's such an even level playing field, and the margin for error is so slim to the fact that there's not much that's going to separate a 3 or a 4 seed from a 13 or a 14 seed this year. And let's be honest, that's what makes college basketball such a great sport.
It is. We are a week out from selection Sunday as of the recording of this podcast, but I just want to talk about the Big East tournament first, starting with Seton Hall. I think is the most interesting team in the field here, and they've shown, in my opinion, upside. I think they could actually contend for the championship this year. Do you agree with that?
I do. And, Seton Hall is an interesting study. They obviously started out as the preseason number one this year in the Big East. They gained that national attention when Miles Powell went for 37 points injured, and they lost by a basket to Michigan State, who was the preseason number one so early in the year. But then the way they were just so successful in conference play. But I'll tell you, Mike, what sold me on Seton Hall before conference play even began, besides Kevin Willard's coaching, is when they beat Maryland without Miles Powell and without Sandro Mamukelashvili, who are, two of the top players within the league. And, they check all the boxes. They have senior leadership. They're veterans. They shoot it from the outside. They have point guard play. They're tough defensively, and they have size on the inside. And they're one of the biggest teams in the country lengthwise. It's pretty surprising that they were in first place for the last 2 months, and somehow, the last week of the season, now they're the 3 seed and playing in the late session Thursday night at MSG, which is surprising. But you know what? Their last 2 losses of the season were the 2 top 15 programs in Creighton and Villanova. I actually think Seton Hall and Miles Powell, Mike, are going to look better when they get out of Big East play. I think you hit a gauntlet at a certain point in this conference in February to where everyone's playing each other a second time. Some of these kids have been playing against each other for 3 to 4 years. They know each other so well to where now when someone has only 2 days to get ready for a Miles Powell, I think that Seton Hall is one of those teams that could look a lot better when the big dance begins.
Yeah, it doesn't make some sense. So I'll touch on one of the two teams you brought up. First, I want to go to Creighton because they actually win the number one seed in the Big East tournament, which means it's stunning because they were picked seventh in the preseason poll. So, like, what do you think of Creighton's chances to make a run?
Oh, Creighton! Listen, Creighton is another team that has just as good a chance, and it's because they shoot the basketball at such a high level. I mean, you could talk about point guard play, you could talk about size, you could talk about shot blocking, rebounding, all different factors. But the one thing we really see when teams advance, and especially go from the first weekend to the second weekend in March, is how do you shoot the three ball? And Creighton and McDermott has so many threats out there. And you're right, they were the preseason seventh in the coaches poll. That's why I feel like Greg McDermott's going to be the Big East Coach of the Year, even though Jay Wright and Kevin Willard are worthy. But to win the league outright when you're a pick seventh, but they have so many tools and they have size on the inside. And they have Alexander on the perimeter. Zagorowski should have been a first teamer. He wasn't. He was a second teamer. But and they have guys that have played together, and that's the key. I mean, you look at DePaul. They had so many quad one wins, and they won at Iowa. They beat Minnesota. They beat Texas Tech, and they started off terrific in November and December. And then they came in 10th place in the Big East. Well, why? Because they haven't played together for several years. When you look at Seton Hall, when you look at Creighton, when you look at teams that, are at the top of the league and advance in March, they've been playing together for several years.
Yeah, that's true. It's also kind of some of the Villanova group too, which is I think is flown under the radar in the Big East this year. Everybody's talking about Seton Hall. Creighton kind of snuck in there late. What kind of upside do you think Villanova has, and what kind of shot do you give them in March?
Villanova is an interesting discussion because this might be Jay Wright's best coaching job in the last 5 or 6 years, and that's crazy when you think about what they've accomplished. But this is not your typical Villanova team to where Jay Wright usually starts like 3 seniors and 2 juniors. Jay Wright was very young this year, and I remember for Fox, I called Jay Wright's like second or third game of the season. I want to say it was like November 14th or 15th down in Philly, and he was like, I just, I still don't know. I don't know how good we could be. I think we could be good, but he goes, we're clearly not, a top 10 team right now. We're going to have a lot of work to do, and because that was their preseason rankings coming off of last year. To fast forward 3 or 4 months, and Jay keeping them a top 15 to 20 program, these past 2 to 3 weeks, is really remarkable. And when you look at James Robinson Earl, who was the best freshman in the league, along with Gillespie and the other veterans that he was able to plug in there, just a terrific job by Jay and Villanova. The thing that you got to keep an eye on when the NCAA tournament happens. Now, listen, they could easily win the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. But the thing is, when you're playing on neutral sites and neutral courts and arenas in March Madness, they're young. There's a lot of guys out there that don't have a lot of that big game experience in March Madness. They shoot a ton of threes, and their defense is inconsistent at times. So if they have a tough matchup, or if they have a night where they're not really shooting it well from downtown, that's when you could get clipped early in the NCAA tournament. So Villanova is going to be an interesting one to follow.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye on them. Also, keep an eye on Providence, who you actually saw on Saturday night when they just routed DePaul in a massive blowout. They're the hottest team in the Big East right now in the tournament, and they were basically dead and buried about a month and a half ago. How stunning do you think this turnaround is for them?
No doubt about it. I mean, 7 out of their last 9, definitely the hottest team in the league. I want to say right before the Super Bowl, they were in 8th or 9th place in the league, and the fact that Ed Cooley has them going in 4th place, just behind Seton Hall, ahead of Butler, ahead of Villanova, ahead of Marquette. It's just remarkable. And once again, it goes back to the theme that we just talked about. He had the largest senior ceremony in the entire league. He was the oldest team in the league this year. He basically loses his entire starting 5. And the thing about them is that the transfer Pipkins from UMass, it took a little while. There were some bumps in the road. It actually took, several weeks, a couple of months to finally push the buttons with him. But Alpha Diallo is playing like the preseason first team All Big East performer that he was slated to be. They got Pipkins. They have perimeter shooting. I'll tell you this, Mike, because I've talked to other Big East coaching staff. Nobody wants to play Providence at Madison Square Garden. They bring a good crowd. They travel well to New York. But Ed Cooley's team is big. They have size. They're long on the inside. They're long on the perimeter. They're physical. They rebound. They defend the heck out of you. If they're making shots on the perimeter, they could beat anybody. They could cut down the nets on Saturday night and win the whole thing. The caveat with them is that their perimeter shooting can be inconsistent, and they could have really, really cold streaks offensively. But they're definitely one of the surprise stories this year in the Big East.
They are for sure. Another surprise, kind of in the negative direction, is just how Butler kind of fell off once they hit the league, because they were red hot out of the league. They had some great wins. They took Baylor the wire down in Waco, and then now they're sort of stumbling. They finished sixth place in the league in the regular season. Like, what happened to Butler once the Big East play started?
It's funny. I think Butler is another one of those teams, like a Seton Hall that we said that had stretches where they stubbed their toe, where they could be better when they get into March, when they get into the NCAA tournament, to where they get out of conference play, to where teams know them so well. But I remember calling one of their games on January 9th or 10th, and I thought they were very good. I thought they were solid, but I didn't think that they were a top 10 program. So as they navigated along the way, I thought that there were times where Kamar Baldwin, who's one of the best players in the league, obviously, I thought that his secondary supporting cast could have stepped up a little bit more. But as you saw last night, he put the team on his shoulders and he single-handedly beat Xavier at the end. So, listen, one thing about Butler is that they defend in the half court. And when you have that box checked going into every single game and you make it tough for the opponent, I wouldn't be surprised if Butler, went around farther than they should in the Big East tournament. I'm just not sold on them getting out of the first weekend in terms of the big dance yet.
Yeah, that makes some sense. There is one guy in the Big East I think could potentially wreck a game for his team. That's Marcus Howard from Marquette. And obviously, he's like one of the nation's leading scorers. Like, can he bring this team a little further along than maybe their talent level would indicate?
Yeah, what Marcus Howard's accomplished in this league, as we know, and offensively, and and his shooting and his offensive talent is really, really remarkable. But there's another side of me that feels very bad for Marcus Howard because of all of those key losses and big transfers that left Wojciechowski and Marquette last year. Marcus Howard and Marquette, they planned on having a Seton Hall type season, to where Miles Powell, he was surrounded with Quincy McKnight and Big Sandro and Gill on the inside, and then you had the Hauser boys just, skip town last year, and Marcus Howard and Wojciechowski, they had a scrap and claw. And, the thing that scares me about Marquette, though, now, this is 2 years in a row to where they've had a really, really bad ending to the season. Dropping 6 out of 7, 7 out of 8, a bad swoon going from late February into early March. So it's going to be interesting. I think Howard definitely is going to be a very, very tough cover when he gets out of Big East Conference play too. But I think that they have to have the right matchup if they're going to win an NCAA tournament game. Because of his size factor. If they have a lot of length on him and he's not really red hot from downtown, that could be a factor. The thing about Marquette is, Marcus Howard is that, main factor. Now, how does the supporting cast wind up helping him?
Yeah, that's definitely a big question. One team I'm very intrigued by in this tournament to see what they do is just I'm intrigued by St. John's because I think they have a good shot to get by Georgetown because Georgetown's so banged up. And then they would be playing at noon on, I think, Thursday against Creighton, who they just beat by 20 at Carnesecca 2 weeks ago. So that'd be a lot of fun to see if that would happen.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's so funny because there's so many different angles that you could look at this thing. I mean, they dominated Creighton at Cornhusker. They were red hot. But now that's the good news. The bad news, Mike, is I could really only think of two times this year to where they made double digit 3 pointers. And it was that game where they were red hot, and then it was a game I covered when they were in Chicago at the Paul. They made 13 3 pointers, which obviously we know didn't happen for them this year. And it's interesting because I also called on radio with John Minko from WFAN their game when they played at Omaha this year, and Creighton really kicked them hard and beat them up because obviously we know how tough it is to win in Omaha. But listen, that is a factor going against St. John's on Thursday in the afternoon session at Madison Square Garden with the New York, Wall Street, St. John's faithful crowd there. I agree with you. I think that they get past Georgetown, and I think every coach in the league would agree that it's not easy to go against St. John's because of how hard Mike Anderson gets his guys to play defensively with that full court pressure. I think that they're going to have some lucky shooting. They're going to have to make some shots from 3-point land. They're going to have some guys step up and overachieve beyond their season averages. But now, listen, let's go back to earlier in the season. They beat Bob Huggins and West Virginia's team very early in non-conference play. Where? At Madison Square Garden. So, listen, anything could happen at this point. And, the way Big East Conference play has gone this year wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, for sure. My last question is a two-pronged one. Like, who do you think is going to end up winning this tournament, and how many teams do you think the Big East will get into the dance on Selection Sunday?
Yeah. What's funny is because of Villanova's big road win to cap it at Georgetown, and then obviously all the talk with Creighton. Creighton and Villanova is the one and the two is going to get all the pub the next couple of days from a broad sense and conference perspective. And I'm really, really sold on Seton Hall. I think that you better not stop paying attention, and people better not stop talking about Miles Powell and the Pirates. They literally check all the boxes for postseason March success. They have senior leadership. They're a senior leading group. They defend. They rebound. They have 3-point shooting. They have the intangibles, and they've been on the big time stage before. The fact that we're set up potentially now with them being the 3 seed for a Villanova Seton Hall a semifinal matchup Friday night, I think is stellar. My pick 3 months ago to win the Big East tournament was Seton Hall. So even though they're 3 seed, I can't change with that now. So I'm going to go with the Pirates to win it all. And I truly believe that 70% of this league is going to get into the NCAA tournament. When you look at where this league has been, and whether you want to talk 7 teams, 6 teams, when you're able to say that 70% of your league got into the NCAA tournament, and listen, for the 3 teams that don't make it, DePaul returns everybody next year. Mike Anderson's in year 1 of a rebuilding situation at St. John's, and Patrick Ewing had to deal with a lot of adversity and personnel issues this year. But I don't care if you're the ACC or what conference. To say that 70% of your league is going into the big dance, that proves to you that this year Big East basketball, I think if once you get past the Big Ten, was the best basketball league in the country.
I would certainly agree with that. It'll be fun to watch the action down in Madison Square Garden this week. Vin, thanks for taking all the time to talk about the Big East tournament. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Mike, thanks so much, and really, truly keep up the great work on your end.
Yeah, I definitely will. Before I let you go, you want people to know how to follow you on social media and some of the other stuff you're up to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially for the next month during the Big East tournament and March Madness, I'll be covering the locals here in the metropolitan area. When you want to say Seton Hall, St. John's, Rutgers, and conference play, conference tournament play, I'll be on SNY throughout the night, throughout the weeks for Geico Sports Night. I'll be making radio appearances on WFAN and other local affiliates and CBS Sports Radio, national affiliates as well. And to get other updates, the best is on Twitter at Vin Parise, VinParise.
All right, there you have it. Vin, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Mike.